Welcome to the channel. Please consider subscribing. I produce videos daily covering cloud topics with emphasis on networking. Hit the bell icon as well to get notified. Let me walk you through this GCP load balancer exam question. We have a newly deployed application behind a load balancer that needs to be accessible via two domain names, example.com and webexample.com. The key here is understanding URL maps in Google Cloud load balancing. URL maps are crucial for routing traffic based on host names and paths. The question asks us to identify which configuration is not valid. This is a classic negative question format in certification exams. Notice that we have 4 options, and 3 of them involve configuring specific host names, while one mentions configuring an IPv4 address as a host name. This should immediately raise a red flag. GCP Load Balancer Architecture. Before we dive into the answer, let's understand how GCP load balancers work with URL maps. A load balancer in GCP consists of several components working together. The front-end configuration handles incoming requests using forwarding rules and IP addresses. The URL map is the traffic cop. It looks at the host name and path in the request and decides where to send it. Backend services contain your actual application instances. The URL map connects the dots between what the user requests, host name, path, and where it should go, backend service. This architecture allows you to host multiple applications or services behind a single load balancer, routing based on the domain name used to access it. URL map configuration basics. Now let's look at how URL maps actually work. A URL map consists of host rules and path matchers. Host rules match against the host name in the HTTP request header. For our scenario, we need host rules for both example.com and webexample.com. Each host rule can have path rules that further refine where traffic goes based on the URL path. The important thing to understand is that host rules match against host names, actual domain names that users type in their browsers. They don't match against IP addresses. When a request comes in, the load balancer checks the host header against your configured host rules to determine routing. Analyzing each option. Let's examine each option carefully. Option A suggests configuring the IPv4 address as a host name. This is problematic because URL maps match against the host header in HTTP requests. When users access a site via IP address, the host header contains that IP address. However, the question states users should access via the domain names provided, not the IP address. Options B and C suggest using asterisk, example.com and web.example.com as host names. The wildcard asterisk, example.com would match any subdomain of example.com, but not example.com itself. Option D correctly identifies that we need to configure example.com as a host name. This would properly match requests to example.com. Common URL map patterns. Let me show you some common URL map patterns that appear in real-world scenarios and exam questions. Understanding these patterns is crucial for the certification. First, exact hostname matching. This is what we need for our scenario. We want to match exactly example.com and webexample.com. Second, wildcard matching. Using asterisk. Example.com matches any subdomain but, critically, not the root domain. This is a common mistake. Third, path-based routing. After matching the host name, you can route based on URL paths like API, asterisk or images. This allows sophisticated traffic routing within a single domain. The correct answer revealed. So which configuration is not valid? The answer is option A, configuring the IPv4 address as a host name. Here's why. URL maps match against host names in HTTP host headers, not IP addresses. While users can access a load balancer via its IP address, that's not what this scenario requires. The question specifically states the application should be reachable on the provided domain names. Configuring an IP address as a host name in the URL map doesn't make sense and won't achieve the desired result. This is a classic exam trick, mixing valid configuration concepts. IP addresses are part of load balancer setup, with invalid usage, using them as host names in URL maps. Valid configuration examples. Let me show you what valid configurations would look like using gcloud commands. These are the types of commands you might see on the exam or use in real projects. For example.com, you'd create a host rule that matches exactly that host name. For webexample.com, you'd create another host rule. Both can point to the same backend service. The commands I'm showing demonstrate proper syntax for creating URL maps with host rules. Notice how we specify host names as strings, not IP addresses. You can also see how to add path matchers if you need different paths to go to different backends. This flexibility is what makes GCP load balancers so powerful. Configuration best practices. When configuring URL maps for production, there are several best practices to follow. First, always use exact hostname matching when you know the specific domains. Second, be careful with wildcards. Remember that asterisk. Example.com doesn't match example.com itself. You need separate rules for the root domain and subdomains. Third, consider using path-based routing to optimize your backend usage. For example, static content could go to a different backend than dynamic content. Fourth, always test your URL maps thoroughly. Use tools like curl with custom host headers to verify routing works as expected before going live. Common exam pitfalls. This question illustrates several common pitfalls in GCP certification exams. First, watch for not questions. They require you to identify the incorrect option, not the correct one. Second, be wary of options that mix valid concepts in invalid ways. IP addresses are part of load balancers, but not as host names in URL maps. Third, understand the difference between similar sounding configurations. For instance, asterisk. Example.com and example.com are different host rules with different matching behavior. Finally, always refer back to the scenario. Here, the requirement is clear. Make the application accessible via the provided domain names, not via IP address. Key takeaways. Let's summarize the key points from this exam question. URL maps in GCP load balancers route traffic based on host names and paths, not IP addresses. When configuring host rules, use actual domain names that users will type in their browsers. The host header in HTTP requests is what gets matched against your rules. For the exam, remember that IPv4 addresses cannot be configured as host names in URL maps. This is a fundamental concept that often appears in questions. Understanding these concepts will help you not just pass the exam, but also design effective load balancing solutions in real-world GCP deployments. Good luck with your certification.